Hey guys, it's Amber from NotableInk.com, and I'm thrilled to be sharing 2 ways to color Altenew's Paint-a-Flower Hydrangea stamp set. So I'm going to start with a piece of their new watercolor paper set. This is the A2 sized watercolor panels, and I'm inking up the Hydrangea stamp set with limeade ink. I want to do some no-line watercoloring today. So I picked just a light ink that I knew would coordinate with the colors I was planning on using. I'm going to use Deep Blue Seas, Green Hills, and Cherry Blossom. I don't end up using these shades of purple. I start off by putting down some clean clear water with a number 4 round brush, and I'm going to drop Deep Blue Seas at the tip of the petal and then Green Hills at the base of the petal. Now I quickly learned that it would take me forever and a day to color this if I only did one petal at a time. So after I waited for those petals to completely dry, I wet 4 petals that were adjacent to those and then did the same process. I dropped in the green at the base and the blue at the tip. Now it's really important that you let the petals completely dry before you do a petal next to it. That's actually going to help you create those dark edges around the edges of the flower, and it'll help keep that flower delineated from the one next to it. If it's still wet, it's all going to blend together. Now for the other one, I was getting bored with green and blue, so I decided to switch it up and add cherry blossom to the tip and the Deep Blue Seas at the base of the flower, and I colored those in the exact same way. So here I'm going to create a couple different shades of green for my leaves and my stems. So I've taken cherry blossom and Deep Blue Seas, the same colors, mixing those together to create a purple. Then I have the Green Hills, which is the same green I've been using. Going to put a bunch of that on my mat, and then I'm going to start mixing that into the purple that's above it. Now I'm not going to mix my entire puddle of green because I want to keep the original Green Hill shade. I want to have a mid-tone, and then I have a darker color of green that you can't quite see, which basically has more of that purple into it. Now the reason I didn't just use shades of purple, which is already a purple, I wouldn't have had to mix it, is because that could be a completely different color than what I already have on my project. A note about these stems, I'm just doing a wet on dry technique. So the paper is dry, I'm bringing my wet brush with the pigment to the paper. I always find that's easier technique to do with stems or things that are this small rather than doing a wet on wet. So while the stem is still just slightly damp, I'm just bringing in the darker color for shadows. So basically when you're mixing your green, it's nice to use colors, the colors that you've already used in your project with the green to dull it down and create different shades of green. Hopefully that makes sense. I think it just makes it look a little bit more cohesive rather than introducing a whole nother shade or tone of purple to dull down your green. For this leaf, I've dropped in the lightest green, and then I'm dropping in the darker green to just add some shading. I let that part of the leaf completely dry before I moved on to the underside of that leaf. So for this, the folded over leaf is going to cast a shadow on the part that's underneath. And so you just want to make sure that you have that deep dark shadow right underneath that, and then it fades out to a lighter green. I let the panel dry and took 2 rounded rectangle dies and used those to create this frame. And then I just used a white charcoal pencil to mark where the leaves overlap the frame, and I want to cut those pieces out. I want to make it look like the frame goes behind those leaves without having to fussy cut this image. Once I cut the rectangle, then it wasn't truly a rectangle anymore. It was kind of skewed, so I used the positive piece as a template to make sure that my rectangle was straight. So I just have some temporary adhesive on the back of that. I've glued down part of the rectangle and glued down those other pieces individually. I'm going to add my sentiment, and this is also from the set. I just used a piece of purple tape to mask off the sub-sentiment that's underneath it. I stamped Smile in Tide Blue Crest ink, and it's Spring in Obsidian Pigment Ink. Here I'm just going to add some splatter. So I have the Deep Blue Seas, I've watered it down. My brush has quite a bit of water on it just to make it easier to splatter. And then I'm just going to use some Nuvo crystal drops to add some centers to these flowers. And I brought the stamp set over because in some areas it was hard for me to tell where that little center should be. Here's the finished card, and I love how it turned out. I love how there's those crisp edges in between the petals. And at first I wasn't sure if I liked the border, but I think I do actually like it. I went ahead and took that positive piece and stamped the image with a white pigment ink. I use StazOn white pigment ink because it dries so quickly. Even though it's not really meant for porous surfaces like cardstock, I think it works well. I did need to stamp it twice, and I'm using my Faber-Castell POLYCHROMOS pencils to color this in. So really minimal colors. I have a light green, a dark green, a white, a magenta, and a blue that is very similar to the cardstock. It's a little bit darker. The only other color that I'm going to bring in is a black color pencil to add some additional depth and shading at the end. So I'm obviously not going to show you all of this coloring. We're going to do it similar to how we did the watercolor piece and just show you a couple of the elements of each one. So for these petals, I put blue at the base of the petal, then came in with the magenta kind of midway, and then I'm going to add white at the tips of the petals. So I started off with a really light touch and some blending in between the colors. Then I'm going to come in with a second coat and a firmer hand so that I can get some of the strokes of the pencil. I want to see some of the texture of the pencil marks in these petals so that they have a little more character and more texture to them. So here I'm going to add, again, a really light coat of the green to the leaf. Then I'll come in with light coats of each of the shadow color, which is the darker green. And then I'll deepen up the center of the leaf just to add a little bit of dimension and depth and curl to that leaf as well. After we're done with those, I'm going to come in with the black. So black is really going to help your shadows pop. It's going to make your colors appear more vibrant. It's going to add more depth, and your eye is going to be more drawn into the flowers once you get your black color in there. So don't be afraid of adding black. If you didn't want to go for straight up black, another great color to use like this is like a navy blue pencil. If you're using warmer tones, like maybe some reds or oranges, maybe a super dark brown is going to be the right color for you. But either way, adding that darkest color in there is really going to help your images pop. So you can see so much more detail here with this, just adding these small touches of black and coming in from both directions on your leaf. So just one little line just helps that leaf come to life. Then we'll add a little bit of the darkest shadow and the black to the petals as well. So you don't want to outline the entire petal. Just add a few flicks at the base of the petal, and then just a touch here and there where those petals overlap is going to be enough. You don't want to overwhelm the image with the darkest color. So this time I added some white Nuvo drops to the centers, and I hope you guys enjoyed these two completely different ways to color Altenew Paint-a-Flower Hydrangea. If you did, please consider subscribing, liking, and ringing the bell on my channel. I'd love to see you again. Thanks so much for joining me today, and a huge thanks to Altenew for inviting me to the hop. I'll see you real soon with more inspiration.